recall.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of Parliament, radio listeners and viewers. Not the most elegant beginning, but we are here. Allow me as well to begin by echoing my condolences to the Brown as well as the Choisy family for their losses. And I'd like to begin again the presentation on land issuance and land pricing policy. Very brief presentation because I think I would like, of course, to leave a lot of room open for deliberation, discussion, and a way forward. What we've done, my team and I, is to begin by offering first a brief background. Second, was indicated by MP by Scott Williams, a brief introduction of the DDAM arrest, what it actually is, why a land policy, and finally, country package E7. And of course, toward the end, as we go into our questions, I will go back to introduce my colleagues as well, who I unfortunately began this presentation without mentioning. Background. October 2021, PFP MP, so Party for Progress MP, submitted a motion calling for formal land issuance policy by December 1st, 2021. The motion proposed a halt on land allocations in Vineyard Heights and addressing issues with previous applicants. Parliamentary discussions were cut short, preventing meaningful debate on the motion's resolutions. On January 2022, there was a court ruling that ordered the Minister of Rummy to cease long lease land issuances in Vineyard Heights. Finally, the court ruling reinforced the urgency of implementing a transparent and structured land issuance policy. DDAM arrest. Now, the team and I decided that it's very important to spend some time exploring what exactly DDAM is for one simple reason, is because despite it being in place, a number of persons are still approaching the ministry, myself, and government as a whole regarding requests to actually have a piece of land or to deed their land. And with the presentation, you'll now realize that unfortunately, that is not possible. So we begin very quickly. In the DDAM arrest, it was ruled that the government must establish strict legal requirements for the handling of land transactions to ensure the principle of equality, transparency, and fairness. And there were two rulings on this case, the first, November 2021 and November 26, 2021, and a follow-up on November 15, 2024. The core principles from these rulings are as follows. Mandatory transparency and competition. Government bodies cannot freely sell, lease, or allocate land without publicly announcing their intentions in advance. If multiple parties exist or could reasonably be expected to be interested, the government must allow them to participate in a fair selection process based on objective, verifiable, and reasonable criteria. 2, strict conditions for exclusive lease or sale. An exception applies only when it is objectively certain that there is only one serious candidate who uniquely qualifies. In such cases, the government must publicly justify why no other party could reasonably qualify before proceeding with the transaction. A mere assumption or informal agreement is not sufficient. The third core principle from this ruling, legal consequences for non-compliance. Failure to comply does not automatically void a contract, but it constitutes unlawful conduct by the government. This means that excluded parties may challenge the transaction in court. If the sale or lease has not yet been finalized, the court can prohibit the government from proceeding. However, if the transaction has already been fully executed, in principle, the sale remains legally valid. An excluded party may seek financial compensation for damages. These rulings impose strict compliance obligations on public bodies, including the government of St. Martin, reinforcing the need for transparent procedures, public announcements, and fair selection criteria in all land transactions. So what are the implications for St. Martin? These rulings directly affect how the government of St. Martin, and specifically the Ministry of Rummy, must handle public land transactions. The government is now legally obligated to ensure all land transactions are transparent and publicly announced well in advance, ensuring that interested parties have a fair chance of obtaining the lease or sale. Define and publish clear selection criteria before allocating land. Thirdly, justify any decision to sell or lease land to a single party with objective, legally sound reasoning. Avoid informal or indirect allocations without proper public procedures. And finally, we are then and thus obligated to develop a formal policy that aligns with the DDAM criteria, ensuring that all land transactions follow a legally sound and transparent process. This policy must provide a clear framework for public announcements, selection procedures, and justifications for exclusivity to minimize legal risks. As a government, we must ensure that land, a scarce and valuable public resource, is managed in the best interest of the people of St. Martin. These rulings reinforce the need for fair, transparent, and accountable governance in all land allocations. So why a land policy? As I did before, transparent and fair distribution of land. One second, Madam Chair. Based on clear and consistent steps in the policy, everyone goes through the same exact process when applying for land and will be assessed equally based on the same criteria. Additionally, the processing of the request will also strictly comply with the processing steps as described by the policy. Secondly, why a land policy? Guaranteeing social equality. Based on the policy, we ensure that all socioeconomic levels in society are treated equally, and no one gets preference over the other. Only in very specific cases and in view of general interest for the country, exemptions or other rules will apply. For instance, if the land will be used for social housing development. Preventing uncontrolled urban growth. Without a land policy, urban growth happens uncontrolled and chaotically. With a land policy, we can better control, regulate which land use purposes are allowed in which areas. Creating a balance between tourist and local needs. And you realize very quickly, Madam Chair, through you, that a lot of the need to have a land rental agreement or a land lease agreement also ties in very closely to the idea of zoning. Hence a number of the points that you see here as to why a land policy. Tourism, our main source of income, is our main source of income, but the lack of a focused land policy can lead to an imbalance between tourism development and local needs. If there is no balanced approach, this can result in excessive emphasis on tourism infrastructure and services, compromising the interests of local people and sustainability. Protecting the environment and sustainable use of natural resources and preventing ecological damage. Without a policy, destruction to ecological valuable areas such as natural areas, coastal areas, and biodiversity hotspots is more likely to occur. Valuable areas such as protected natural areas, coastal zones, and habitats. Uncontrolled development can lead to a loss of diversity, destruction of natural ecosystems, and a damage to critical habitats. And finally, protecting cultural heritage and identity. Uncontrolled development can also lead to the loss of cultural heritage and identity of local people. If there's no land policy to ensure the protection and preservation of culturally significant areas, the traditional way of life and cultural heritage of the community can be lost. So we finally come to country package E7. This is actually an agreement between St. Maarten and the Netherlands for a number of interventions necessary to receive a number of loans post the COVID-19 pandemic. Country package E7 deals specifically with the Ministry of VROMI, and the terms of reference is published as is. VROMI is executing 3 projects under E7, of which the land issuance and land pricing policy, as indicated, is one of them. A terms of reference has been published for the 3rd time recently. The first time was December 9, 2024. The second time, January 22, 2025, to hire a project manager for the execution of this project. The closing for applications, February 22nd. The reason, of course, for the 3rd time publishing this is because we have had some challenges in terms of soliciting interest in actually handling this project. The timeline, of course, is as soon as we hire a project manager, the timeline to make this policy is exactly 1 year. So, as we see with the challenges of finding someone interested to actually make this policy, we actually are slightly pushing our timeline further and further. But, of course, to mitigate any further delays, we have, of course, started internally working on an interim policy. I think we have also pulled what we could from the MP Durand, former Minister of VROMI's proposal that he proposed back in 2022 or 3, I believe, with some key steps that could be taken to establish a land lease policy. A number of other things too, when speaking with the consultant, indications about not necessarily looking within only the kingdom, but given St. Maarten's unique situation, looking as well within the other islands. So we've been looking as well at the policy for the British Virgin Islands regarding Crown land, as well as St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia. Finally, moving forward, the Ministry of VROMI will implement strict compliance measures and establish a formal land allocation policy to uphold the legal standards and protect the integrity of our land management process. I'd like to also clarify that DDAM, as stated in several meetings that I've had with Parliament, is strictly about the issuance of new land. Persons are still allowed to transfer, have extensions, and also to renew existing policies. With that, Madam Chair, I come to the end of my presentation. I thank the honourable members and look forward to their questions.
Thank you, Minister Gums, for that presentation. The members of Parliament, of course, if you wish to speak in this public meeting, you would have to sign the speakers list.